do the sex. Today's locker room talk topic is Sacred Slut, women's secret sexual desires revealed. And my guest today is both a badass online sex and sensuality coach and a magical fairy godmother who grants women the ability to realize their deepest sexual desires and fantasies in real life. And her name is Hannah Diendorfer, correct?
Yep, nailed it. Yeah,
yes.
Great.
And I actually came across her profile on TikTok, my new favorite place to meet other badass women who are empowering other women sexually. And I was instantly taken by what you had to say. So I would like you to take a moment and introduce yourself to my listeners.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. You're the first outreach I've gotten from TikTok to come on to a place like this and speak. So I'm very excited to feel that I'm making an impression there that is in alignment with what I want to be doing. So thank you. And who I am. So you nailed a lot of it. I'm a sexuality coach. I am a somatics coach. I'm an intimacy coach. And I think the way that I relate to that is, and to sex is that in my life, sex has been the place where I have found the deepest personal development, the deepest expansion of who I am and my ability to express that confidently in the rest of my life. And that is what drives me to support women in this space too, because if they can have 1% more asking for what they want, 1% more confidence, 1% more comfortability in their skin, 1% more sense of safety in themselves, that can change the world. And so I'm here for that. And I appreciate you're doing that work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. So today, listeners, I am drinking coffee and Hannah is drinking water. It is early in our day.
It's Monday morning and I'm trying to hydrate.
And we both still have work days in front of us. So that's what we're doing. But let's get ready to talk about sex. Cheers, Hannah. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
And even though it is 11 o'clock my time, I'm still on my first cup of coffee. How I came up with the name of this podcast is that I saw that you're doing this 5-month-long program for people-pleasing women. And it sounds sort of like the power woman, you know, she's trying to make everyone happy. She's working hard. Who are craving a deeper connection with their pleasure, playfulness, purpose, and ultimately power. And so what drew me into this was the connection that you are drawing between a woman's connection to pleasure and to power. And so hopefully by the end of this conversation, we'll kind of get to that because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings around it. But first, I want to talk to you about the women that come to you. When they come to you, do they know what their struggle is to connect with their desires, or what is it they say to you when they come to you and they're like, I'm missing something?
Totally. I think there's a mix. I think there's some women that come in with this kind of vague understanding that there could be more to sex than what they're experiencing, and feeling like they're somehow not living up to their sexual potential. I think that's part of it. And then there's the more practical things like it's really hard for me to get wet, or I don't get wet often, or I've never had an orgasm, or I used to have so much desire for my partner when we first started our relationship, but now I don't know where it went and I don't know how to get it back or how to spark that again. So there's a broad range of ways that disconnection from sexuality can show up in someone's life. But I think it presents often as just a lack of expression and a lack of like the lack of fulfillment, like feeling like there's something missing there.
Right. And they don't know what it is.
They often don't know what it is. They don't know. Well, there's not a lot of information out there about how women can understand their bodies and connect to their sexuality. And so that leads us to feel lost around
Right.
it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I feel like that is something that so many women can or relate to essentially. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
most women go through a period in their life where they do feel like they're losing that side of themselves. I think when we're younger, accessing sexiness and sexuality can be easier. But then as
Mm-hmm.
time goes on through programming, in my opinion, by the patriarchal society that we're living in, a lot of that gets stripped away by, the shame that we are taught to feel
Mm-hmm.
around our desires and all of that stuff. So I guess another question is, what do you think the primary blocks that women experience to accessing and even knowing what their desires and fantasies are when they come to you?
And the number one is stress in all
Right.
forms. It always comes down to that, because when we're stressed, our body is in danger. There is like this feeling of we're being chased by a lion, whether that lion is our career or the standards we've set for ourselves or our children or pleasing someone else or our partners. There's this feeling of trying to get somewhere and running in circles and running in place. And then just general life stress contributes so much to blocking off of that connection.
Right. Right. Stress. That is something
Stress.
that's come up since I have started this podcast. I talk about the orgasm gap a lot and how
Mm-hmm.
many women aren't orgasming during sex. And it comes down to stress being
Mm-hmm.
the number one block.
Yeah. But
Um,
I will say another thing about that, though, is misunderstanding about what creates orgasm for women most often.
mhm.
Um, Believing that we should be having orgasm from penetrative sex. And it's usually an anatomy issue because our clitoris, the part that is protruding, the part that is most available to receive pleasure, depending on how far away it is from our vaginal opening, can create a whole number of reasons why we can't orgasm from penetrative sex. And then there's this internalization of, oh, there's something wrong with me because I can't come when my partner's inside of me. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Isn't it funny that this story was built around that we were supposed to orgasm just from having something shut? And there are pleasure centers inside of us, but none of them are
Totally.
quite like the clit. That's for sure. None.
Yeah. And the way that the clitoris is structured, if you are orgasming from penetrative sex, it's because the internal part of your clitoris is being stimulated through penetrative sex. It's all the
Right.
clit. It's all the
Right.
clit. Yeah.
And my understanding is we've only recently started to really understand the full structure
Yeah.
of the clit. Like, it kind of blows me away that now, for the first time in my life, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
48,
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing images of the full clit, which is not at all like the images I grew up with, which was the
Mm-hmm.
bean, the tiny little
Mm-hmm.
bean. And now there's this whole big structure that's inside of
Yeah.
you. And
Mm-hmm.
what I don't understand is how, everyone's always talking about modern science and so how is it this was missed? This was missed for so long, you
I
know?
I don't think it was like an intentional scheme to like shut down women's pleasure.
Yeah.
Like I there certainly may have been an undertone of that because of the way the patriarchy is set up. But I think genuinely there was just misinformation about which parts on men are a match for parts on women. And because most of the science is done with men, it was just kind of like, oh, well, we'll just one to one kind of assume that the way that women's sexuality works is the same as men,
Right.
which is totally incorrect.
Right.
So
I
I
mean,
just think there was a, yeah, like, oh, this must be how it is. So we'll just not look into it any further.
I agree with you. And then there's been lots of talk about how science really, until recently, scientists were primarily men.
Yeah.
So, you bring women into any area of study, you're going to get a different perspective. So, anyways, that's very interesting to me. A lot of the work you do, it sounds like to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is about helping women access their desires, their fantasies, the things they want to do, that they are struggling to connect with. And I understand stress is a block to being aroused and even being able to get into your body enough to allow those desires and thoughts to come up. But what are some other ways in which women are struggling to come face to face with those things that they really want to do and experience sexually?
I think one of the biggest things is just a prioritization of it. There's not there's still, I think, in our culture an over emphasis on success and achievement, including motherhood, being the most important thing you can do with your time. Like that is what is valuable in our society. It's rewarded. It's like glorified. Productivity is the number one thing that you can do. And there's so much on how to maximize your productivity, so many tools for cutting down the time it takes you to do tasks, and so many things that make our life more leisurely. And it's interesting because like we don't use then that leisure time to explore ourselves. And so we use it to create more, to be more productive. And there's, I think, just a lack of understanding about how impactful that time of self-exploration can be. And then a guiltiness or a feeling of this isn't productive or I'm not doing something worthwhile if you're just spending time pleasuring yourself or exploring your fantasies. It's like impractical and not grounded. And there can be a lot of shame in that. I mean, shame is a whole thing around sexuality that if we crack open that box, we could talk about it for hours.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to dive into that in this conversation a little bit. I don't know if you've seen or listened to it, but I am currently on a 365 days of orgasms challenge myself with a goal of having an orgasm every day this year, which has been insane.
Congratulations.
Yeah, last night was a rough night. I made the mistake of waiting until the last minute to knock mine out, and I was not in the mood. But as I've shared that with women, one of the most common comments that I get from women is that it sounds like such a chore to them, and like it exhausts them to even think about, which is interesting to me. I certainly in the beginning experienced that. And then I kind of realized as I was going about it, like, well, of course it feels like a chore. I'm not actually doing this for the pleasure. I'm like doing this because for the expectation of the orgasm, which is so much like having sex with a dude sometimes, you know?
Totally.
I mean, it's so fucking real. I was like putting pressure on myself to come. But I do think that women feel guilt when it comes to the idea of seeking pleasure. Someone said in a comment to me, I don't, it's like dessert. I don't want dessert every day. I want it to be special. And I was like, oh my God, like you look at experiencing pleasure as something that you should only get on occasion if you've been very, very good. I mean, I feel like that's not a unique perspective.
No, definitely not. It's definitely not a unique perspective. And I think the two things that you mentioned, the one that it feels like a chore, I have a thought on that feels important, that like, we don't particularly enjoy, generally, people don't particularly enjoy doing things that they're not good at, or that they feel like a beginner, or that they feel like there's like a negative momentum behind it. So for sex to feel like a chore, it makes sense because maybe you feel inexperienced, or you feel like you don't really know understand the outcome or what it's supposed to be, or like it feels hard to do it, which of course you wouldn't want to do it if you were a beginner and it sucked all the time. Like if you have no reference point of pleasure, and then your only reference point of pleasure is like, I have to work really hard to get myself off, or I have to try so hard to get someone else off, I would not want to do it either.
Right. Right.
Of course not. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was young and I started having sex, I felt like I had to be good at it, meaning for the other person. Like I wanted to be a woman who was good in bed because it held like some status, but it was a job and I was not coming at all. I also think there's a lot of thought of work that goes along with it, in that you're supposed to look a certain way. be sexy enough to have sex and be good at it. You have to be in shape, and you have to present in all of these ways. And so that's a whole lot of work that goes into being deserving of good sex and pleasure when none of that is true. Of course, that's been put upon us. So
for sure.
So those are some obvious blocks that come up. When women come to you for this sacred slut experience, they want to experience pleasure. I get that. But can I ask you, in your experience talking to them and the work you've done, by not having that access to that pleasure, I want to know, how does that affect the rest of their life? In my experience, people seem to think that sexuality, that is it's in a container in our lives. Like it's this part of us, but all of the rest of us is disconnected from it. My belief is that sex, how we experience it, our sexuality, not just orientation, but how sexuality and sexiness and sex itself shows up in our body, is intertwined with every other part of our being. So I would like to know, in your experience, do you find that when these women who come to you that aren't able to access pleasure, that aren't able to access and realize in real life their fantasies, how is that affecting other areas? Is it affecting other? First of all, I'm making an assumption based on my belief, but are you seeing that? And if so, how?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest felt sense in life of a lack of sexual vitality is experienced as a lack of confidence and a lack of worthiness. And so the way that can show up in life can be all a range of things, from settling to in relationship with people who are not honoring of you. You end up in relationships over and over and over with people that don't really value you. You don't feel confident enough to ask for what you want in your work. Like you don't speak up for a salary increase, or even changing your job or leaving a career that's not fulfilling to you. There's like this kind of dampening effect that it has on what experiences you think you deserve and have access to in life. That and also relating to like where your body's allowed to be and like what you can wear, and like there's just all of these little nuanced and how you show up in conversation. Like if you assert yourself in a group of people when they're talking, like if a group is trying to decide on an activity to do and you just decide to keep your opinion to yourself because other people are more important. There's all of these ways that a lack of confidence and worthiness can show up, and it depends on you and what your life situation is like. But I most often see these things showing up in relationship and in the career, in money.
Right. That makes sense. And at some point, women just kind of hit a wall, right?
Yeah.
And want something more. Yeah, that resonates. So they come to you and they're like, help. So let's get into what you do. Where do you even start? Where do you start? Where do they start?
Yeah. So what I like to do first is what's called, what one of my mentors called, climbing the mountain of what is so. And I think that what is so for every person includes, what exactly is going on in your body right now? What are your emotional states that exist inside of you that you're not feeling and experiencing? What is happening in your life? What exactly are the conditions under which you're trying to have a better sex life currently? What are your relationships like? What's your relationship to your body like? And we're climbing this mountain of what is so that we can see from the top what needs to happen next. We need to really take stock of all of the things in your life that are potentially contributing to you not having the kind of sex you want to be having, not just so that we can make decisions from there, but also so we can look at it from a place of, this is normal, this is okay, this is allowed. All of these things, if you look at them in totality, all of the things going on in your life, what you're experiencing makes sense. And I think that any transformation that takes place needs to come from that first feeling of, oh, yeah, like I make sense. This makes sense. My body is normal and okay, and what I'm experiencing and feeling is allowed, and it's right. And it's from that first level of acceptance of like, oh, okay, this is what's really going on. This is where what I see. This is the context, the playing field where we can make choices. I think that's the most important foundational piece.
When you say that helping women see this is okay, this is
Mhm.
normal, are you talking about their desire or just in their body or their thoughts about what they want? Do you find that women are struggling with the truth of the sexy things they want to do?
No, I think that what they're struggling with is feeling broken. Like they believe that they shouldn't be feeling like they can't have orgasm. They shouldn't be, their body should be responding a different way. They should have this spontaneous desire. They should just know everything they want. There's this underlying, I'm wrong and broken because my sex doesn't look like that yet. So I really work to close that gap of like, actually, you, how you are right now, not even talking about fantasy and desire at this point, but like where you are, what you're doing when experiencing is perfectly normal and okay. You're not unhealthy, you're not broken, you're not wrong, you're not too much, you're not enough. Like really like starting to work on letting go of that shame and having compassion for their current situation.
So what you're saying is what they experience most of the shame around is their inability to feel desire.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
interesting.
Yeah, and maybe not even their inability to feel desire, but um, just the way that they're functioning, they believe is unhealthy or not good enough. Whether it is that they have an overactive sex drive and they fantasize all the time, or they have no existing sex drive and they don't know what they want.
So you
Like
deal with both. You deal with both
anything,
the low sex drive and the high sex drive.
yeah.
That's fascinating to me. I want to dive into the difference between your experience with working with women with a low sex drive and high sex drive and what
Hmm.
that how that manifests. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, how did you come up with the name for this program is The Sacred Slut, which of course caught my attention. Um, how did you come up with that name? Where does that name come
So
from?
I honestly, I can't even remember like the exact moment that it popped into my head. I think I was just talking with some friends about this program I was going to make a couple years ago and like figuring out what I wanted it to be. And the word slut first, like I think, that's the more provocative
Slut.
one.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
in my experience, I have been slut shamed in
Sure.
my life. Like many, many women who decide to one day wake up and express their sexual being, they come up against this culture that says if you have too many sexual partners, or if you're too loose, or if you're too, you know, expressive with your sexuality, or you wear these kinds of clothes, you're wrong. You're bad for that, for having too much sexuality. And and so for me, the word slut and reclaiming that is a reclamation of I'm allowed to fuck whoever, whenever I
Hmm.
want, however I want, and that's okay. I'm not bad for that.
Right.
Um, and adding sacred to it speaks to me to my personal philosophy about sex, which is that it's this deeply transformative, sacred experience that when you attend to it with care, the same way that you would um, attend to a garden, watering it and giving it love, it can blossom into this space for deep healing and personal development, and
Right.
become a playground for who you are. And so those two things together, I like that. I I have a affinity for contradiction. I
Right.
like the idea that we can be anything, and that those things can be totally contradictory and complementary to one another. And so it seemed to me to be a very fitting name for this program.
I like the idea of reclaiming that word slut. I've talked a lot on this podcast. I don't know if you've listened to other episodes, but I use all kinds of language, and I am of the belief that women should be comfortable with and feel like they have access to all of the language used to talk about them sexually, to talk about the sex they're having. And it's sort of, and it's been, I've had some guests that have struggled with the language I use, which is all of the language, because we've been taught that it's not, we're sluts or we're bad women or crude women if we use these words that are used to describe us sexually. And usually it's supposed to demean us. But I believe if you take that language over for yourself and you use it proudly, then it no longer can be used to shame you, right?
Totally.
So,
I mean, it's what you're describing is like the essence of shadow work. It's like the work that I do with my clients on a lot of their shame, like what I was talking about before, that bringing things to light, climbing the mountain of what is so. It may include a reclamation of language. Anything that we believe is off limits in our expression is going to find a way to manifest itself destructively in our life.
Absolutely.
Sexuality included. So when we take back those words like slut or pussy or cunt or whatever thing, whatever word or idea feels like, oh, I could never do that, I could never be that, you already are. It's already part of you anyway. So you might as well face it and become face to face with what about that you're not allowing yourself to have. And then choose it. Choose if you want to express yourself that way or not, but not because someone told you that was bad, because you decide that's not a right fit for me. And I tried it on and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's exactly how I feel about it. And I love the name because I do think it's a powerful name, and it takes something, a word that has been used against women, and it makes it ours, especially when you're using it in healing context. So I love that. So cheers to that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. I love triggering people too.
A lot comes out when one is triggered, right?
Absolutely. And it's like, because I have a background in trauma and therapy, and I understand how to also hold safe space for people. I'm like, I like when someone brings to me that I triggered them, or that there was something about the way that I was being that created some kind of feeling in their body. I'm like, okay, great. You're alive. You're turned on. Let's work with that.
Right. I trigger people a lot. I know that might surprise you, but quite a bit.
I believe it.
And I do also feel like it usually helps bring attention to whatever is going on with that person. So on that note, we are going to take a little break and for a short message. And then right after, we'll come back and I want to talk about kind of circle back to the difference between women with high sex drive who are battling with that end, and women who just can't get it to turn on. So we'll be right back. At the beginning of the year, I embarked on the 365 Days of Orgasms Challenge, and Fun Factory toys like the Lady Bi, a dual motor vibrator that hits my clit and G-spot simultaneously, have been making my orgasms faster, stronger, and way more fun. Here's the good news. Fun Factory makes tons of high-quality orgasmic toys that are both body-safe and eco-friendly, and you can buy them at a 20% discount when you use the code SELS20. That's right. Go to funfactory.com, and when you're ready to make a purchase, enter the code SELS20, or scroll down to the notes in this episode, hit the Fun Factory link, and when you're ready to make a purchase, enter the code SELS20. Then go enjoy your next mind-blowing orgasm. Cheers. And we're back. Hannah and I were talking about the sacred slut and women trying to connect with their desires and pleasure and how that feeds into their personal power and all of that wonderful stuff. And I wanted to circle back to a little bit of a discussion we were having before we took the break Hannah also works with women who have what sometimes gets, and I hate this label because I've definitely worn this label, which is hypersexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about when those women come to you. We
Mm-hmm.
always hear about the women who can't get turned on because this society is definitely built to, just dampen our sexual desire and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
What does a woman who just like is rubbing them out all day long and doesn't feel like she's getting enough sex or is worried that she wants sex too much, what does she say to you? What is that conversation like?
It's really interesting because like I know there's so many women that feel like, oh, I'd wish that I was like that. I wish that I had this spontaneous desire and wanted to have sex all the time and could just be so sexual. But the women that fall into the opposite side of that category are honestly, quite honestly, usually struggling with similar things. There is often too much stress, and their response to that stress is to attempt to complete that cycle of stress with sex. There is also a feeling of helplessness or out of control or confusion with their body, just the same as women who struggle with a lack of desire for sex. It's two sides of the same coin. There's with both of them, with the missing piece is what kind of sex do you actually want to be having? Like what would actually want get like if you're on the other if on one side of the spectrum you're not having desire, what kind of sex would make you feel it's worth having and worth wanting? And on the other side, what kind of sex is actually going to fulfill you and nourish you and satisfy that pushing desire to like always get more and always get more? There's a middle ground for both sides of that, which I think is so fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting to look at that overwhelming need, want, desire for sex constantly as a desire that's not being met and fulfilled. And so it's like you're constantly hungry, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And never finding food that nourishes you enough to like ease the craving. And I know at
Mm-hmm.
times in my life when I've struggled with just a high libido to the point where I'm trying to work. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really realize till later that I was like breaking for my masturbation session in the middle of the day just so I could like calm the fuck down and
Yes.
like go back to work and complete. And there would be times when I actually felt like I couldn't work unless I did that. It was and it is a great stress reliever, right? You're getting all the dose of oxytocin, you get
Mm-hmm.
a dopamine hit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think there's shame, a lot of shame around women, for women who are told if you are, what, you're a nymphomaniac. There are
Yeah.
all of these awful words for a woman wanting to have pleasure and have sexual connection regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, it's like you lose either way. Either you're cold,
Totally.
stony bitch, or you're a nymphomaniac slut. You just
Yes,
can't win.
exactly.
Like
And
what?
there's shame on both sides. Like the shame
Mhm.
on both sides is really what is blocking them from being able to just express themselves the way they want. My assumption that I work with women on is when they're in that place of really high desire and wanting a lot, that what they're seeking is relief that they are okay. And the more that they create this narrative that I am insatiable, I need sex all the time, they're feeding that anxiety loop. And then that shame that's on top of that perpetuates more of that out of control feeling and needing to go masturbate to feel
Right.
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think when you add shame to that little recipe, you're opening yourself up to get involved in some destructive sexual experiences,
Yeah.
when you're told, okay, it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You're being told you're this bad thing. And eventually you're like, well, if that's how society is going to see me, I'm just
Hmm.
going to go and like act out. And I think that happens a lot
Definitely.
in our society with women. And then that heaps on the shame.
Hmm.
So shame is such a tool for oppression and control.
Hmm.
Um, here's an interesting question, because it was interesting when you were talking about both women with low desire and high desire. It's almost like the solution is the same. Well, what is the sex that you want to have, the intimacy you want to have, and the pleasure you want to have that will, either make you feel satiated, and so, kind of level that desire out for you, or ignite you, so that then you're wanting to engage in sex. It's like the same solution to very different problems. What are some of the things women end up revealing to you or finding that maybe is surprising when they talk about what they want to be doing and having?
Um, I think I don't know if it's surprising to them, but the thing that most women are really craving is the kind of sex that is very present and really safe and has a flavor of depth to it.
Mhm.
Like I don't know that that's necessarily surprising, but it's congruent among everyone on all spectrums. Is this drive toward a kind of sexual experience that feels simultaneously thrilling and exciting, but also really secure and really safe. And what may be surprising to them is the way that exciting portion comes out. They may oftentimes reveal that they fantasize about women and they didn't realize that they were fantasizing about that, or they fantasize about having a threesome with two men or a gangbang or things like that, or that they always thought that they wanted to be submissive, but when they imagine dominating their partner, it turns on a part of them. So whatever that thrilling taboo component is, they also want to experience it in a context that is really loving and safe so that they can bring that forth and express that.
That's, I'm so glad you actually used specific examples,
Hmm.
because I think that, and it's definitely a podcast I want to do down the line, and talk to women about this, but you brought up the threesome with the two men and the
Hmm.
gangbang.
Hmm.
And I'm sure, jaws will drop. And how do you do that safely? Blah, blah, blah. And it's interesting to me, because I relate to that. I identify as bisexual. Uh, you know, I've long gotten past the idea of a threesome with a woman and man. I'm like, fuck yeah, like makes sense to me. I was for years the idea of two men and myself, like I couldn't even allow myself to go there. And so many of my women friends who I very much respected, um, would like be in awe at the idea of two guys. And I was like, that sounds so rapey. Like that was the word I used. It
Mm,
sounds rapey and violent and degrading.
yeah.
And then my girlfriend said to me one day, she's like, really? Because I just imagine two men worshiping my body and it all being about me and
Hmm.
how amazing I am and how much they want me. And
Yeah.
suddenly I was like, something like turned on in my mind. And um, so,
Hmm.
and it is interesting. And I've had experiences, and I've known women who have had experiences in these wonderful, safe containers with people
Yeah.
who adore them and treat them
Hmm.
well, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. And I think that it's interesting that you bring up these specific situations that we are taught. Like I would, from my own upbringing, for me to fantasize about more than one dick,
Hmm.
it was, to me, that was like, oh, it's dirty, it makes me dirty, it's like
Yeah.
degrading to me, and these people would be bad to me.
Hmm.
um and it took a lot of deconditioning, and now like that opens me up to realize, oh, all that fear and shame was really around shame, and something that was hiding or holding me back from being able to
Hmm.
enjoy larger fantasies.
Hmm.
So I imagine that that happens with women, other women, on all sorts of fantasies. From,
Totally.
I mean, there's so much
Totally.
shit out there.
There's so much. And, what I love um seeing happen. So I'm also someone that I've experienced a gangbang. I've experienced threesomes with men and women and group sex, and I've been very fortunate that I have had most of the fantasies that I have in my life, like already played out. Like I've done a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And can speak to the women that may be fearful of creating those things, that you are more in control than you think you are if you find the right people for those scenarios. Like there's so much safety that can be created. But what I was going to say is like the reason why I like doing Sacred Slut as a group, why that group aspect element to the program is so important, is because of that reason, that sharing, that ideating, that like you see one woman stand up and claim, I want to have a gangbang. And then so many other light bulbs turn on, like, oh, if she said that she can have that, then I can fantasize it. I could think about that. I could maybe
She
have
made it
that. It's like,
okay.
it's all of the permission granting that happens so quickly. And I like to think of like my experience as a giant permission flip. Like if I'm a normal person, you would see me on the street and you would not for one moment think that woman has done all of these crazy sex things. And I'm normal and I have. And that is like, you can too. If you want something, if you really fantasize about something and it means a lot to you, like it would be a meaningful experience to you, like there are people out there who want to fulfill your fantasy and want to do that with you.
And other normal people. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
the crazy shit I've done has been with primarily normal people. And some of the most crazy shit I've done has been done with people who would consider themselves, or no, I'm sorry, they wouldn't consider, they would present themselves as
That's
more,
conservative.
yes,
Yeah.
conservative people are fucking, they're,
Breaks.
they're freaks. They're freaks. So seriously. And
Everybody is.
it's true, but they repress it more and put on the face of like
Mhm.
purity, and that it's all bullshit. But it is funny that you
Mhm.
say that they're total freaks. I like sometimes I will put together like I'll generalize people by profession. I say all the time, doctors and nurses, holy shit, they get crazy on their free time. If I back in my dating days, if I matched with a doctor or nurse, I knew what was coming. I knew it was coming. I'm like, it's going to get crazy. Lawyers, cocaine and threesomes all the way.
Mhm.
Lawyers are just, that's
Yeah.
their thing. I'm just saying.
Hmm.
Anyways, my
Yeah.
own opinion.
I love that. And I think what's I want to speak to in this conversation,
Yeah.
um, that I think is really important is that you don't have to fantasize about something crazy to be healthy and normal in your sex life. I think that, what someone might feel listening to this is like, well, oh, well, I don't really want those things. Like, I just want someone who will give me a massage and nurture me and breathe with me and make love to me.
Right.
Does that mean that my desires are not as good as someone who wants a threesome or someone who wants crazy sex? And what I just encourage everyone to do is like try on like a sweater. Like you're going to the store, you're going to try on a sweater and like just see if it fits. Try on. I want you to have permission to try on any fantasy for yourself and see if it fits or not. And if it doesn't, then it's not your fault. It's the sweater's fault. The sweater's not made for you. It doesn't fit right. It
Right.
feels itchy, uncomfortable. You don't like it. Okay, fine. Great. At least like you have that permission to know if it's right for you or not. But if you never let yourself imagine or dream or consider, then you might be missing out on the best sex of your life and you don't even know.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, it works both ways. I think there was a period in my life where I thought um I couldn't get really excited unless it was something that was highly taboo situation.
Yeah.
And then I entered a relationship where I started enjoying like the most vanilla of sex. And I
Yeah.
was like, if we fucked 3 times in a week and it was all vanilla, I was like, what the fuck is going wrong? Like I would get
Hmm.
into a place of fear, which I know sounds weird, but there are
Not
different
weird.
sides to women are it's easy for us to get confused about what makes us sexy sexual beings. And I think you're right.
Hmm.
try on the sweater. And maybe
Mhm.
there's a season for like one outfit and it comes back around every year, every
Totally.
week, right? And you can
Yeah.
have periods of time where it's like, dude, I just need to be like tied up to the bedpost and you
Mhm.
need to do some crazy shit to me every day
Yeah.
this month. And then the next month you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I want to be cuddled and
Absolutely.
slow fucked,
Absolutely.
you
And I
know?
mean, imagine also like our bodies change every day with different hormone levels as we go through our
Mhm.
cycle and in a greater span of our life as we go through different hormone cycles. And so
True.
to expect that our desire and our fantasies and our arousal and our amount of sex that we want and type of sex we want should be consistent over our life is doesn't make any sense. It just like
Right,
doesn't make
right.
sense.
Well, and I think for and again, I should have talked about this at the beginning. So right now, I think mostly we've been talking about cisgendered women, correct? We're
Yeah.
not necessarily looking at the trans experience or
Yeah.
maybe even the non-binary experience. So this is a very gendered conversation. And I
Yeah.
think within that, um, something I would like to point out, especially when we're looking at cisgendered women, cisgendered men, women's hormones really do fluctuate all throughout the month, sometimes in a week. And like I'm in
Hmm.
perimenopause, so fucking throughout the day. Like
Hmm.
my whole how I feel physically can change. Men don't, cisgendered men don't typically experience that much I don't even know if they have any fluctuation, but in comparison. And I
Correct.
think that's where things can get really confusing in relationships, where, because women, we can be all over the place with what we want and what we need
Hmm.
to fulfill us, to turn us
Yeah.
on,
Hmm.
and when you have a partner who doesn't do that and is constantly like, what's your fucking deal? It can be, like it can get kind of embarrassing or
Yeah,
so. Yeah, no, the hormone connection
definitely.
needs to be talked about more.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about this is a group experience. One of the things I like about that you just kind of revealed is that you do bring women together. They get to
Hmm.
share their experiences and see the
Hmm.
commonalities. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that they're all surprised by the commonalities, even when there's many differences.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the activities that you do?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
like what is it that happens?
definitely. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients is in the realm of somatic therapy
Mhm.
or embodiment work, is what you might also call it. So, using our bodies to transmute shame, transmute energy, work with our emotions, and hold space for ourselves and in the community. Um, our bodies are also really good at different taking on different types of energy or exploring different energies. So some of the activities can range from something like breath work, that may be an activity to help them feel safer in their bodies or down-regulated or upregulated, to movement and dancing and using music as a way to access our emotions and process things like grief or rage or pleasure, and like use our bodies to feel and to turn ourselves on and those kinds of things. um, Another one of the activities that I will sometimes lead women through is like an archetype exploration. So, like, which sexual archetype feels right to you? Do you feel like this innocent maiden who is very in awe of the world and pleasure? Do you feel like a queen that is very dominant or controlling? Do you feel like a seductress or a witch or a temptress? Like,
Mm,
letting women explore and try on this range and variety in their bodies, which is different than just reading about something or thinking about it. Like, that's the work that I'm doing in my programs. It's like taking these concepts that I teach about in the course and then actually experiencing what does it feel like to feel turn on and in which way and how do I want to have that in my life.
mhm. What do women discover from that? What if they reported back to you?
A lot of times there's an initial discomfort usually with some portion of the activity. And that's where the work is done. So, like in every single activity, what I'm looking for is what parts of this feel really easy for you, that feel really pleasurable and good, and what parts of this feel really challenging to you. And then after the activity, like the challenge points, like we're going to celebrate the pleasure points and say, okay, you can have more of that. Here's how. But if there were challenge points that come up, let's talk about those things and process them in the group. Because wherever you're holding back potentially with your dancing, with just being on camera and moving your body, it's very, very likely that that will be connected to how you show up in the bedroom. If you are feeling like you're performing when you're dancing, likely you're also being performative in the bedroom. And then we do processing work around those things.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I can relate to some
Yeah.
of that.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
So as much as those tools are designed to support them in like feeling different feeling states or processing different emotions, what I'm also trying to get at is, okay, where are you still blocked? Like what are you triggered in this experience, and working on that, because that's and teaching them how to regulate themselves and teaching them how to move through those triggers to feel safe, because that's going to translate directly into their sexuality.
Right, right. Huh. That's interesting. Now you also do an in-person retreat, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what is that called?
It is called Erotic Embodiment,
Hmm.
and it's going to be in October, in a month from now,
Hmm.
in Austin.
So is this sort of an extension of the sacred slut work you do, or is this completely different?
Very similar. It's a similar type of woman that is interested in the work. And it's basically taking all of the work that happens online and putting it into a 4-day in-person experience. So if you struggle to feel comfortable really expressing this work on the computer, on the internet, or you just want more in-person friendships or connections to females, this retreat is an extension of that work at a deeper level in person.
And what are some of the activities that take place there? I'm just super curious about.
Totally.
I have never been
Totally.
to this kind of retreat, so I'm
I would
curious.
say similar to what I just described. We'll be doing breath work, we'll be doing ice baths, we'll be doing a lot of somatic work, embodiment work, dancing, movement, stuff like that. Um, and I'm having different practitioners come in to demonstrate different skill sets. So, for example, for this retreat, I'm having a shibari expert, my friend Rena, come in to do a 4-hour session on rope and surrender and vulnerability.
How
So, like
exciting.
being tied. Yeah.
Yeah, the knot, it's the rope and knot work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and do you feel that women have big transformations over this 4-day period?
Yeah, totally. There's always tears. There's always breakthroughs, because there is something more comfortable about a screen. Like, where there's some anonymity when the screen is in front of us. And as deep as I can go with people on Zoom, there's a difference in the energy that happens in an in-person experience, because
Hmm.
they're attuning to me, they can feel my presence with them, they can feel my full non-judgment and acceptance, and they're in the presence of a bunch of other women who are also going through the same thing. So the speed at which the transformation can happen in a place like that is a thousandfold what can happen over even 5 months of online work. I do also include embody or integration calls after the retreat, because I think one of the things that's lacking in a lot of in-person experiences is the support afterwards on how to go back to your normal life and keep experiencing the transformation or apply it to life. So we do a month of weekly calls after the retreat as well, to make sure that it's not just a one-time hit of dopamine because they had a breakthrough, but
Right,
like, okay, take this now and tangibly apply it to your real life.
right, right. Which brings me to what I wanted this whole conversation to lead to. I am like, one of my personal missions is women's sexual empowerment and helping to sexually empower people. And it's interesting as I do more and more research into what women's sexual empowerment is relatively new, the idea
Mhm.
and the concept. And even when you go and you try and look up definitions that other people have put together, it really hasn't been defined, which is exciting because I think for women like you and me, and many of the other women that I've been interviewing, pleasure coaches, like there's just a whole, you know, not group, but there's a tribe of women out there that are really behind this and doing the work. And people are always like, why does everything have to be about sex? I get that question all of the time. And so what I want to tie to, which I think you just did naturally, is the idea that women being able to access their pleasure and to feel empowered in their sexuality and sexual situations is tied directly to their power in society.
Mhm.
So how does that come together with you? How does that come together with your clients? How do they see that? Do you think you can speak to that from the
Mhm.
perspective of your work, please?
Totally. Yeah. So for most of our lives, we're taught that someone else will make us come. Someone else is responsible for us feeling good. Every single Disney fairy tale sets us up to believe that we will be rescued by a Prince Charming or by a parent. And the truth is, especially around sex, that no one is coming to rescue you and no one can make you come.
Mm.
No one can do that for you. And so there is an overlap between this feeling of helplessness and victimhood and sexuality. And when the women that I work with and myself, I take that on as a personal responsibility of I'm going to learn how my body works. I'm going to learn how to give myself pleasure. I'm going to accept myself with compassion and love and empower myself to feel good and take that into my own hands. It removes this dependency on society or something outside of me or my career or my partner to be the source of my joy. And that, I don't think there's anything that could be more empowering than feeling like you can choose to feel good and you can choose to do that and you know how. And it just like opens up a world where you don't have to wait for someone to make you come. You can come whenever you want and however you want and have that. And yeah, it's freedom in that.
Right. And how do you see that translating to the rest of their lives?
I think what I touched on before is like there's no longer this sense of dependency on looking outside of yourself to feel good. Like what happens a lot of times is they may give up alcohol because they realized that they were numbing through alcohol, or they were trying to use alcohol or some other substance as a replacement for their happiness. Um, they find themselves just overall taking better care of their health and well-being because they know that when I do this act of exercise or nourishing myself with a certain food, it feels pleasurable and good, and they have more confidence in making those choices. Better relationships because there's less codependency in that space because they feel, oh, I can do this for myself. I can lift myself up. I can find love and joy within myself, and so I don't need to create this dynamic where this partner's love is scarce and I need to grasp for it in other places. And be healing in parental relationships because a lot of the damage that's done to our sexuality is done by our parents or the church or role models or people that we look up to. And so I incorporate a lot of inner child healing in my work as
Mhm.
well. So when there's a return to innocence and compassion within the self, you can also see that, oh, those people out there that were my parents, they were just doing the best they could and they had bad information too. And so there can be a relieving of blame or wrongness in parental relationships. Like it really, carries over into everything. I could keep
Everything.
listing things
Yeah.
for hours.
Right. And it's a consistent act of self-love, right? You're showing
Mm-hmm.
up for yourself regularly, and
Mm-hmm.
that we certainly aren't taught to do that,
Yeah.
right? To prioritize
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's unfortunately true. So I feel like you shared a lot of really useful information for people.
Thank you.
I would like you to maybe, as we kind of sum this up and close it out, what are three pieces of advice you would give to women out there who are listening, and feeling like they're disconnected from desire or an orgasm and pleasure, or undeserving, or on the opposite end, they're like stressed out and masturbating and seeking sex from people that they don't want to even be fucking all of the time? What would you say to them?
First piece of advice is like to begin to see that however your sex shows up for you is really impacted by all the other things in your life. Um, so if you want to have a better sex life, take care of yourself better outside of sex, like that being the first one, is like clean up the things that are out of integrity in the way that you relate to life first and foremost. And your sex will by proxy immediately get better from that. The second would be start a self pleasure practice, whatever that looks like to you. It doesn't need to be you go lay down on the bed and pull out a vibrator and put it on your pussy until you come. What self pleasure practice means to me is that you are indulging in the present in your life in a moment for 10 minutes a day. Could look like you sip your coffee really slow. It could look like you take a slow, long shower and then put lotion on your skin. It's a cultivation of a daily practice of indulging in pleasure just for the sake of enjoyment. If you did that, everything else would change as well. And the third piece of advice is talk to people about sex. Start talking more frequently and having conversations with your friends, with your parents, with people in your life. To me, the more you engage in conversations about sex, the more normal you will feel and the more connected you will feel about sex. The less shame that you'll have, the less isolation you will feel in any issues that you're having. And just opening up those conversations is going to lead you to learn some really interesting things about the people around you and yourself.
Yeah. Start talking about sex. Do it all the time. Do it openly. Do it without shame. I'm like on board with that. Yeah,
Or do it even if you feel shameful and say to someone, I feel a lot of shame talking about sex. I want to talk about it, but I feel bad about it. And so I don't know what to do. That's an okay conversation starter, too.
right. You'll be surprised at how people respond.
They'll
I'm
be like,
constantly,
me too.
yeah, I'm constantly surprised at how people respond once, when I started doing this podcast and people would ask me, and when it became primarily what I was doing, people, when they asked me what I do, it was uncomfortable sometimes to answer. But the more that I do it, yeah, the more normal it feels. And I'm always surprised at how accepting and then curious people are. People want to talk about sex.
They
People want to be
totally want to
free.
talk about
They
it.
totally want to. I know a lot about a lot of people's sex life at this point as a
Same.
result. So why don't you let my listeners know where they can find you if they want to follow you, find out more, check out your program or your retreat?
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time on Instagram. It's where I find a lot of my clients, where I spend most of my content creation energy. You can find me on Instagram at Hannah Diendorfer. My website is hannahdiendorfer.com. I'm enrolling now for the Sacred Slut and for the next retreat. So if you're interested, my door is open to you to ask questions. Or you can find me on TikTok like Annette did
Like I
at
did.
I am Hannah the Red.
I am Hannah the Red. I loved that name too. Yeah, and if you scroll down to the notes in this podcast or below attached to this podcast, I will have all the links that you need to find her. So check it out. As for me, you know where to find me. I'm Locker Room Talk and Shots on Instagram, Facebook, She Explores Life, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on TikTok at Locker Room Talk Podcast, YouTube under my name, Annette Benedetti. And I think I covered most everything. Of course, you're going to want to head over to sheexploreslife.com to read all of the sex positive articles that are giving you information you need to have a better sex life. So that's me. Thank you for joining me today. And I hope that we will get to talk again soon, Hannah. Thank you so much. And until next time, I'll be seeing you all in the locker room.
Ring loop.